although I think that, yeah. I also asked for the job description.
quick one. In that packet I just gave you is a change order log and a cost breakdown sheet. Do not use those ones. I'm going to hand you new ones because we made some adjustments since.
So the one you just handed us,
That one, yeah, with the agendas, there's other information in there.
so we should ignore that and wait for this one?
No, ignore these last two
You're not
pages.
gonna do this one.
I think this page, you don't have this page, is what he's saying, he's passing an updated one.
The last two pages?
Money, monies.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. Yeah, you've already seen these. You and Michael.
So in the new package, you handed out,
Change log and the,
This is the
See?
new,
Good
this
that
is,
you left it.
this is the
and
new
the,
email. I was all over it.
You do that. And then,
Okay,
of the new package,
we're on, and,
ignore.
so let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah. Here we go.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, it's October 16th, and we're here for a building committee meeting. We have an agenda that's posted on the website as well. The first thing we need to do is look at our minutes from last meeting. They're the first 2 pages of the handout, and I'm looking for a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
second,
Any questions, changes?
one, I think I was here.
You were here, but not listed, okay? Add Russ. Any others?
Just as a point of clarification, the paragraph between E and F, where it starts with Meredith, it didn't seem clear to me whether we deferred the decision on the skylights. I think you read through it by saying it was only one thing that was approved, but which,
I know that we did not make a decision on the skylights, but put it over to this meeting in order to get a more exact price on that.
yeah, I just thought perhaps adding "and skylights" to the last sentence may have cleared it up, because it was brought up in the beginning, but it wasn't.
Okay. Any, all right. Any other changes? With those 2 changes, if there are none others, I move that we vote to approve those minutes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Next is project updates. Greg?
Thank you. As far as a lot of the physical buildings actually being put up together now. I'll start with the elementary school, you'll notice that as we mentioned prior, the gymnasium was already, the block work was already done. Since then, the steel's been going up, which you can see coming out there today. The concrete floors are all been poured for the gymnasium. The east addition, block walls are up, as well as the concrete flooring is all poured through there. As we mentioned before, our heating system is on the permanent source or plant that we'll have for this entire job, or actually going forward. So that's all in place. We're actually getting close to the next month or so turning over actually a small piece of the elementary school where we have a custodial supervisor office and bathrooms that will be turned over and I say relative news. We are still on target for the gymnasium to be turned over in February. You will also see that the curb cut, and if you remember, we had a fun time with the DOT curb cut process. That has been built and constructed. Within the next 2 to 3 weeks, you will see that area get rough paving all the way around to the back back side of the building and back out towards the front, so around back of the elementary school, so that's all in process right now. The fence has been completed, since the curb cut's been done, and if you go by there today, you'll notice, the plantings that we had said we would do are being installed. So that's where we're at in the elementary school, it's moving quite well, and I, met with, our site supervisor down there, and we still believe we're a bit ahead of schedule on the elementary school, which is really nice to see. At the high school, actually foundations are in, floors are poured. You'll see steel work started up today, decking will go on very soon. The west side foundation work is in place, is starting there. The same goal of paving that loop going around the back of the high school is in that same 2 to 3 week target. They want to be able to get that in so that when trucks and traffic move through that area during construction, we're on a paved area instead of a muddy dirt area. So they'll be doing that aspect. Underground plumbing rough-ins at the high school for the east addition are in place. Like I said, slabs and boards, so we're in pretty good shape in that. And that project's moving ahead at a good clip. So you'll see that we've made a lot of big strides from last month. You can actually see the big strides when you drive by. We were able to get the plantings in the front of the high school. I call them phase 1. You can see the trees that we put out in the median area are all been planted. So that's kind of taken on that a better look out there. And of course, as they grow, they'll even look better and better. So we've hit a lot of targets, and things seem to be moving quite well in both projects at this time. And I don't foresee that pace not letting up. I see that we're moving at a good pace, and I don't see any roadblocks for that movement at this time.
Any questions on project updates? Okay, so moving on to the monthly report and the financial update, you'll see Greg passed out a couple of documents. One is a spreadsheet which gives us not only the incurred but the forecasted for contingencies, owner soft costs, and furnitures, fixtures, and equipment, FF&E, and we thought that this was important for the building committee to have this layout, so when we're considering ad alternates, to know precisely, or as best we know, based on our current information, where we're at in terms of available funds. So that's the purpose of that document. Greg's going to spend some time going through it, and you can just ask any questions as we're going through. I found the best way, Greg, to do it when we talked about it was just to go through each category. Some of it's self-explanatory, but if you could do that, that would be helpful.
Happy to. Doing this right now?
Yep.
Excellent. So if we take that document, you'll see we have a total school contingency, and the original starting figure was $1,381,440. Before we started the job, the building committee authorized a change of $297,727, and that is, if you remember, the ductwork issue that we had at the elementary school that needed to be addressed. So that change happened right off the bat. Next line is approved change orders, and actually, if you go to the other sheet that I handed out, it says approved change order log. And what you'll see, these are change orders up to date as well as change estimates that have been authorized. So you can see that the different change orders that have been authorized. You'll notice there's one that says interior lobby door. That is a change order to Ekman Construction, but it is funded through Homeland Security funds. So when you look at that, you'll see we account for that in a different line item when it comes down to the final accounting. So if you go to the approved change log, you'll see it's $309,000 for those change orders. We have another $20,426 in estimates that have been approved. And the elementary. We have change estimates of $55,064 that have been approved at the high school. Recently, it was approved $15,700 for the library AC as an alternate. And I do want to ask John, well, we have John Gloria from Ekman here. He's aware of the change, but I don't know if he knows for sure if the equipment is able to be changed at this point, and that could be a potential stickiness. And do I have that right?
Yeah, it was released prior to last meeting, so we're just working it out with Train. We should be okay, but if something changes with Train, so the equipment was released prior to last meeting. So we reached out to Train, and we're working through, as long as it's not on the assembly line, we'll be able to make that adjustment. But we're waiting. Train can be a little time consuming to kind of work through the path.
Well, apparently I've been taken off mic now, so. I said something wrong, I guess. Thank you, John. The other thing that's been approved but isn't listed as a change order because it hasn't come to us as a change order is the recently approved drainage repairs at the high school. And if you remember, we talked a lot about the drainage issues that we have below the floor in the existing, and that was $27,582, which brings you to a subtotal of $726,122 that are already committed in that particular project, or that particular phase of it. Additionally, that you're gonna have expenditures in the contingency line is we carried $150,000 for unsuitables. We're finding quite a bit of unsuitable materials at the site. We are working right now with our consultants, which is SW Cole, and a gentleman named Tony Hirsch. And Tony's looking at, we're gonna be doing some additional test pits to kind of try to figure out a way, because if we have to dig all the material out and replace it, it gets very, very pricey. So what we're looking at is potential of using grade fabrics to help decrease the amount of materials that have to be pulled off site. I think John has some additional we want to add to that.
Well, just explain a little of where we found it. Going around the elementary school as we worked the roadway, so I think that's the west side, we found a bunch. And then the front parking lot, which we're not scheduled to do that work till next spring, but we did some temporary parking there to give visitors and construction a place to park. And when we started that, we realized how much was there. So that's why we started getting into discussions of what else was up front there. There are other ways of addressing it, which is why SW Cole has been brought into the mix. We have enough time to work that through, so we don't wait till next spring, but we felt it was important that it's part of the discussions now, so it's not a surprise come next spring.
Was there any areas at the high school, an additional?
There have been and continues to be, but there, like the geo piers that went in, we knew we had a bad area, so we had that already set up. We've had a couple other spots that we've dealt with, and I'm hoping we won't see much more, and we'll know over the next couple weeks, because as Greg said, we're intending to pave the two sides down, so the two driveways, if you want to call it, down the sides of each side of the high school. Behind the high school, where our job trailer is, where the locker room has the big underground retention pond that goes in, so we won't pave back there because we got to do that work. But once we get to the point where we're ready to put black stuff down, we'll know what we're dealing with completely, because at that point your additions are in, and your outside site will be, I don't want to say complete, that's not true, but below grade would be done. The drainage is done now, the water line is almost done, and that big retention area will get done over the next couple of months.
So, John, in terms of timing, the asphalt plants will close down.
That's right. So the high school is the week of the 12th to the 17th is what we plan on paving there. Elementary school, probably the end of this month beginning of August, beginning of November, wishful thinking. Beginning of November, we will be paving.
So
It's
you'll-
only binder. In
Yeah.
binder, you have a little more flexibility. Top coat, you watch more of the temperature because you want your seams, you want things. With binder, is a little less of an issue. So doing that in November, most years is a non-issue.
So in terms of non-suitables in those areas you're gonna pave, you're gonna know probably over the next weeks
That's right.
what's there and what's.
And do some test pits at the elementary school, because out front, we're not planning on doing anything. We only discovered it because of the temp parking we were doing. And during conversation said, we really should figure out a little more. If we're gonna make a hole, let's make it, then fill it back in, but understand what we're dealing with. So the design team has a chance to react instead of a fire drill of, oh no, we're trying to do this tomorrow, what do we wanna do? But there are other means, as Greg was saying, with fabric. Maybe you thicken the gravels a little bit and you put fabric under them instead of removing 2 or 3 feet of cruddy material.
In terms of that, at the elementary school, the temporary parking lot, the paved parking lot right adjacent to it, the one that's being used now, are there any concerns about?
That's where we're gonna do some test pits. That's where we are concerned that underneath that is not the greatest material.
What leads you to that?
Everything we touched out front, on that area we worked, all had it, and then we kind of cheated and did a little test pit, and that had it.
One of the other things that was noticed out there is if you look at the pavement out there, it's all breaking up. So when you have pavement that's sometimes called gatoring, or referred to that, a lot of times it's an indication that the subsurface support on below that is not in good condition. So it allows too much flexing and thus causes too much breaking of that surface. It allows too much water penetration. So as you start with that, it starts to continue to break up. I did want to mention that we did also have some information on the high school side of the west side where that paved area and the parking lot going is that we did find some unsuitable areas there that they're
But
still
SW
dealing
Cole
with.
has directed us, we're using fabric,
Yep.
so that we're working that area, the most cost-effective means, and still giving a quality product.
So as we look at the 150 unsuitable, that doesn't take into account what we've already spent.
Correct.
But that's our best estimate for the total project.
What we have not spent or done to date, like we're doing right now, the west side of the elementary and out front, and we'll know more when we do those test pits, how bad out front is or isn't. But if we can do fabric, and let's just say we take another 6, 8, 12 inches out, put 2 feet of gravel instead of 1 foot, it helps bring that number down.
But I guess, John, what I'm trying to understand is I understand it's a placeholder. We don't know yet. Are we being aggressive on our placeholder in terms of what we're setting aside? Are we being
I didn't do
conservative?
a calculation. I wasn't actually prepared to give you that answer tonight because I thought Thursday, after they tell us a little more, we can give you some guidance. If that whole parking lot up front, if you have to remove 3 feet of unsuitables, you're gonna spend more than that. But I don't think we have to. I think there's other means that we can do that will give you a good product and be a little more cost effective.
That was sort of my concern in listening to what's going on. If I'm understanding it, the 2 largest open spaces that we haven't tested yet are the parking lot in front of the elementary school and the back side of the high school. And if the 150 says, gee, that's what we thought last month or a month before, that would cover it. And we're now saying we have these 2 other huge areas that we may be
It was
potential.
actually a placeholder because of the areas. If you had asked us a month before, we didn't,
There's nothing.
that's right.
When I
So-
created this document, I did some generalized estimating based on what we've seen and the idea of going with fabric. Also, that big area out behind the high school has that retention pond, so a lot of that gets excavated out as part of the job anyways. Doing some estimating to kind of come up with a number that I say as a workable number, I'd like to say, I'd like to be under that, but, you know, you don't know what extent it is until we see the actual pit data that we're doing out in front of there. I think it's a good placeholder number, and I think John kind of indicated that if we can go with fabric, it should be below that, but at the same token, if we find that we run into a lot more than we considered, that number could go up.
Yeah, I think to summarize, there's a lot we need to find out over the next, couple of 3 weeks, so I wouldn't get locked into the $150,000 number. It may be one of the more malleable ones on here until we get that information, but it's
I would say that's true of most of these numbers.
Yeah.
They're malleable, that's the nature of the project, right? We know sort of what we have in our owner costs and our FFE costs that we had available to us from the beginning of the project. We've been updating the change orders and contingency, but some of these things are gonna continue to move. We may pay more for engineering at a certain point if something comes up. We may pay more for asbestos abatement if something comes up. And that's the work.
Yeah,
Greg, did we not have borings in the parking lot in the elementary school?
We had a couple of borings, and they showed a certain level of unsuitables, but as we dug into that temporary parking lot, a lot more was found than we got out of the boring
We were
information.
expecting a foot.
But it shouldn't change what you thought we had to do in that parking lot, because we had the borings there.
The materials seemed to be more extensive than we got out of the borings. So,
And we go through the test pits and we may find right back to where we were, because we didn't dig the middle of the parking lot. But that area where we did the temporary was about 3 feet along.
Yeah, but if the boring showed a foot in the existing parking lot, I don't know what they showed. At some point, there's a transition between the two. We shouldn't be assuming there's 3 feet everywhere, because we know what we had in the boring.
correct.
That's my only point, so, I mean,
Yep,
Well,
no.
unless the board, there was an issue with the
We're
board
gonna
as
do
well.
the test pits so we can find out what to
Right.
do. What we don't wanna have happen is all put shades over our eyes, and then next spring when we rip it up, go, we got a problem.
Oh,
So
I
we'd
agree.
rather understand it, and if we don't have a problem, when we come back and report next meeting, we'll be able to give you better information. But that's what those test pits are gonna
You think maybe by next meeting we'll have a better,
do. They're coming out Thursday.
They're coming out to dig Thursday, yeah.
So, say it takes a little bit for them to get a report together, but
We're doing 2 spots in it, one kind of up front of the grassed area by the front of the parking lot towards the bus loop, and then one more into the middle to kind of get a better idea. And you know as well as I do, you can bore here and everything looks great. You go 5 feet over, your bore looks different, but you try to get a best estimate of what's there based on those borings. And I don't think
can the same thing happen to a test pit?
test pit is a larger area, but yes, it can happen.
So it's an unknown, we wanted to give it our best shot here, given the information we have, and it'll change.
Well, the concern I
Probably.
would have is it looks like we're getting pretty thin in some of the contingencies that we have. And if, I recognize we can't have numbers today that are gonna make us feel better. We'll have some in a month, but that's not gonna be the end of it either. More than likely, there still should be some things in the future that may pop up. I just have more of a strategic concern on thinking about ads at this point in time. Because I think we're pretty close. If I'm understanding the numbers, we have 70,000 that's not promised out of the 1,000,003, and we're already over by 70,000 or close to it in the FF&E. It doesn't leave us a lot of flexibility room. I recognize we're gonna have to deal with stuff, but one of them may be saying, let's delay the ad voting and make a priority list, but not really get serious about it until 2-3 months from now, we know a little bit better.
well, we could decide to do nothing with the elementary school parking lot. Been there for 30 years, it's alligator crack, not the worst thing in the world. I mean, just remember, this is a school project, not a parking lot project.
Yeah.
If we have a choice to spend money, I'd rather spend it on the school than on the parking lot. May not be ideal, and maybe the school have to budget to fix it later on, but,
Yeah,
The
and
school
I
is more
wouldn't
important.
disagree with you. All I'm in a position right now that says we're close and we don't have the best information
I agree.
before we start adding additional stuff on. I think we
Well-
should just sort of take a breath and let this play out over the next month or two.
Based on this spreadsheet, I'm not comfortable voting for any additional stuff until we know where these numbers sort out.
Sort of.
I can continue on through it.
Why don't you, Greg, the elementary sewer?
Yeah, elementary sewer, right now is at 50 grand, and that is the budget guidance that we've been given from Ekman on that particular item. And I think that's still, that particular item is still a discussion point on do we do it or do we not do it?
And the issue comes down to we've taken a film of the line. We have a better idea of what's there. There are dips. That's what's proposed to be fixed or taken out and replaced. It's a lesser amount, I guess 30 feet versus pretty much the whole
Yeah,
line.
and the other thing to add to that is the fact that we are removing certain parts from that. So for instance, the grease or the waste from the kitchen that used to go in that line will no longer be going in that line. It's a separate line going to a grease trap that exits the building, and that's all brand new. So that gets removed from that. So it is going to decrease the fixture loads that particular line has.
So the decision, it seems, just cutting to the chase, is, the line has been working as long as it has, 30 or so years. It should be in a better condition now that when it's cleaned out and that we're not running grease down through it. So the decision is this something you go forward on now, or you wait?
So I think if folks recall, at our last meeting, we talked about doing further cleaning and rescoping as we got a little later, and it wasn't something we had to make a decision on right now because we weren't going to be tackling it right away. And so that's a placeholder. If after we do that next round of cleaning and scoping, and we have the engineer review, we determine we want to do it, that's how much we're projecting it's going to cost.
It's really going to come down to the decision too of, is it necessary? Like, it's not a problem that was caused by anything we're doing, so it's been there. Did it happen day one the school was built? Did it happen 5 years? Can't answer that. But it's been functioning fine. We're decreasing what we're doing to it. So is it a cost for this project, or is it something that, the school monitors and has it cleaned every few years or whatever you want? Because my understanding is your problem, the backup happened once 10 years ago. And by the fact that the cleanouts couldn't even come off tells me that it had been a long time since it had been opened up. So it's just, we're trying to give you guys the information so that you can make an educated
Right,
decision
and-
with whatever
but
you choose.
My question is, to me, there's two issues. One of which is, let's get more information so we can make a decision, and we don't have that yet. But the numbers that we're putting down here, is the 50,000 representative of the cost of saying there's 30 feet, not 150 feet? And if we don't choose to do any of it, it could be lower than 50. If we choose to do the 30 feet, 50 covers it.
So the
And-
50,000
Or, oops, it
represents.
goes larger. It's the same with the 150. If the 150 above it represents what we know now,
You have two lengths, or two places. One is 10 to 15 feet, the other is 15 to 25 feet, kind of at opposite ends of the school, that are even in discussion.
gotcha.
And to replace those two sections is 50 grand, plus
Great.
or minus a
Okay.
couple dollars.
Which, that answer, and that's all I was looking for, is that 50 represents fixing the smaller portion that we were aware of last week. If it grows, it could be more.
But keep in mind, if you do the same work 3 years from now, of course, labor, things can increase, but nothing we're doing on this project, are we opening up areas that you would then close up to then have to reopen. Like the VCT that's in the hallway is remaining. So if we don't do this work, it's the same VCT. If you have to take it up 5 or 10 years from now, it's the same thing. Maybe when you're ready to do some flooring, you make some different decisions. So that kind of stuff. We're really in your existing school, the ductwork mechanical we're doing above the ceiling is probably the biggest scope we're doing, but other than that, we're very limited into a couple small spots. And we're not,
So the estimates are reasonable estimates based on what we're hoping assuming it doesn't get worse, this should cover it.
And I'd be surprised if it gets worse. It's just whenever you have a dip, you try to figure out where it stopped dipping on
Right.
both sides, and then put something in between and make that line correct.
Can we use squirrels to clean out the pipe? We've got plenty of squirrels around town.
We have cleaned quite a bit of it. When they went through and jetted it, it did just.
That's worst case.
You can do more, you can try to put, I think people felt a lot more comfortable after that last camera cleaning than they did 2 months earlier, both the engineers and everybody.
So we don't have to decide this now, so for the sake of moving on,
And those are placeholders at this point, because you
Right.
need to be aware of the costs there.
the elementary office.
The elementary office, this is probably a new look or a hearing for people. So since the design happened, we have picked up an additional assistant principal as well as an SRO that no offices were ever designed or thought of for. So this is actually changing the main office to incorporate those two offices as well as the sprinkler changes, the HVAC changes, the electrical changes, everything that has to happen to be able to make that move forward. We have a sketch that's been approved by the principal and his staff. I just need to get that over to our architectural company to take a look at it, and then I can tighten that number down. I threw a $50,000 placeholder in that for this, at this time.
And that's reallocating the existing space. That's not expanding, it's just making what we planned smaller so we can fit other.
We're gonna add one office into that space and convert one office over from its current use and relocate one person to another office area within the school. I think I captured it.
That's good.
The next item, and I'm just gonna kind of quickly skip over this, the FF&E overages, if we have overages in that account, we have to pick them up someplace, and the only place to pick them up is in our contingency costs, but I'll hit that when we come back into it. Additional asbestos, we've already had some additional asbestos costs. We will continue to have additional asbestos costs as we open up walls and find areas that we need to do additional abatement. The elementary slider removal, you can see it's a small amount. That could be an operational, but I put it there so people know we have a slider on the outside of the elementary. The old, if you want to call it the old service window, which is kind of outside of the space, outside of the building, we need to get rid of that and put a solid panel of glass in there. As I said, that can be an operational item, but I think people need to be completely aware of it. The next item is a high school stage structural. This work has been done. I do not have the final pricing, but it did require us to put in additional steel work and re-supporting some beams because the plans called for a block area to be removed, and it turns out that the beams were actually being supported by that block area, and so we had to do some additional structural changes to be able to support those beams. The high school 1925 drainage and storm, once we got excavating, I can't say that area, we found that the storm drain and the sewer for the 1925 buildings were tied together. And so it was found kind of the interesting way. It started raining and water started pouring through, and it's supposed to be an abandoned sewer line. So this number is for us to address some of that, to fix that, to separate those areas, because we have to have them separate from storm and sewer. So I put a placeholder there. I also added 165,000 of undefined change orders, and that's just a change order we don't know about. And we needed to have some kind of placeholder for that.
Yeah, that's probably one of the most malleable, again, numbers here,
Exactly.
because we haven't even, as John, I think you said, we're just 25% or even if that into the project, and that is truly a placeholder, and nobody should be tied to it at all. We just don't know until we get moving down the road, especially in the high school, I think. It's a big unknown.
Should we take that off the list then? There's nothing actually for that, that makes the contingency look artificially small. We know we're gonna run into change orders, but I mean, if there's nothing behind that, I don't,
It just should be reflected in the balance.
yeah.
And we could certainly, I was asked to put this together, come up with
Understood.
where we're
understood.
projected, that I think we may be at. It is, it's a very pliable number.
Well,
So,
undefined, I mean, at this point, undefined is 0.
correct.
Well,
It just has to come out of the balance.
Right.
depending on the way, you can also deal with it just by adding them up, subtracting out what you have, and saying, gee, if we have 190,000 that's uncommitted at the moment, that's, 13, 18% of what the total is all we have.
In all,
In any case,
yeah, in all
it's-
events, I think this whole thing gives folks a better idea of where
Yeah,
we're
how
at.
tight it is.
Yep. Keep-
John, we're spending a lot, the big flex here has been on suitable materials, but we are 25% of the way through this project, or so.
But with site, we're more than that, like the overall, like,
Right.
because especially the high school where so much of that work is inside the existing building,
Right.
but the site, as we were saying earlier, we're gonna be paving in November, and once we've done that, we've finished digging in the ground, that really gives us a darn good idea where we are, which is why we're doing the test pits in the elementary, because that parking lot's a next year problem.
And
We
my
wanna
question's a
understand
little
it.
bit different than that, based on your experience of, a project of this size, we're 25% of the way through, we've used almost all of our contingency. You haven't opened up walls yet, you haven't, investigated a lot of things you'd like to investigate. Are you concerned at this point that we've used up so much of it?
I'd always love to have more in case it happens, but we, as a group, have to manage what we're dealing with.
My question is different. Other projects you've worked on when you're this far through the
Yeah.
project,
We're more into it than I'd like to see.
that's
Yep.
really.
So if I was to say, I'd be very careful about trying to approve alternates for things, as we've been talking for the last few months. You're gonna need that for what we don't know yet, before you go, put some other things that were alternates because they weren't part of the original scope, so
Right.
we should just be careful.
That concept, I think it's important to emphasize that concept isn't new, and John and others have been saying all along that those alternates are there for a reason. They couldn't feasibly be included in the original budget, and this is, as we said, a dynamic process. We have a modest contingency, and we're only 25% of the way in, yet we've drawn on it somewhat, and it's with so much to go on the project, it might not be the most prudent thing to start adding those things, and those are truly additions. They aren't part of the project that already existed that we're foregoing. So folks should know that.
And I look at it even more conservatively, I guess, about the 165 being here or not. From my standpoint, I'm assuming we're gonna spend it. We're gonna see those issues. So it's not unreasonable to assume that number's gonna be enough. Therefore, I agree with you even more, that add alternates just aren't gonna happen unless.
Well,
Not now.
I mean, I agree with that. My only point is that, Greg was charged with putting this together, and I think he did a very good job, but 165,000, if Greg had wanted to say, he could have said 200,000, he could have said 100,000. It's just a placeholder. I don't think that should be there. We should move it back to contingency, but understand that we're probably gonna spend it all as it goes on, but there's nothing committed to that. There's nothing committed to that $165,000
Yep.
number.
Eric, you are right. there was no committed to that, but felt in going through the review process that we needed to have some kind of placeholder, knowing that you're gonna have change orders. What that number looks like, you're right, I could have put 200,000, I could have put 100,000. I tried to do it based on percentage.
Understood, and I'm not saying anything wrong with that, I'm just saying that unless there is a change order,
Assume the
it
balance
shouldn't
is
be on
zero.
that list.
And assume that the contingency that's left with that in it is still gonna be used for
Yes.
those unknowns. And I
Yes.
think that's really the idea of what you're trying to show.
Yes.
Whether it's 250 or it's 350 that you have, still understand, it's not, you don't have so much that you want to be spending it on alternates.
And I think that, I'm glad you put it in, Greg, just for that reason. I'm glad this whole discussion is occurring, so that we're all aware it's probably gone. Although we can't identify it. So now, let's not start putting landscaping in the additional landscaping, committing to it.
It brings up, just to me, another issue about looking forward, and certainly the change orders are there. But the other question I have, I don't know if it's worthwhile to do a couple of other exercises over time. One would be looking at risks and opportunities outside. I mean, we know we're limited to the bond issue as to how much money we can spend. If we find a lot more things that we have to take care of, it may end up starting to put us in a position where we have to give up on a few of the things that we had planned, unless we have other sources of money. I don't know, and I'm not saying we have to use them, it's more just getting the whole picture on the table so people can judge. I don't know if any of the school trust funds, for example, would have small pockets of money that may be able to take care of FF&E or some of these issues here. I don't know, you talked about interest we may earn on the bonds, which may require a talk, but just starting to put together the pieces that allow us to know whether there's any additional flexibility here to cover risks or to give us some opportunities to do some things.
Yeah, we need to do that.
Mary?
I'm happy to respond to that, which is, yes, there will be interest. The board would need to place a warrant article before voters to be able to spend that interest. You can wait and do it as one, or you can do multiple. We know what's available now, that's included in the monthly report every month psychologically. I think there are advantages to doing more than one request for that, as opposed to waiting until the end of the project. The board has also had conversation about impact fees. These are two things that we talked about back in March when we knew we were spending a quarter of our contingency before we even started the project. And there's a couple $100,000 available there that the school board has the authority to request to be spent towards capital projects. And then in answer to your question about our capital reserve funds, there's a couple $100,000 there as well. Some of that has been allocated through CIP to deal with things like a roof project that are outside of the scope of this work. There is some limited funding there. We're also trying to tackle things that are unrelated to the project, the operational costs as we move along. Answering sort of the FF&E question, it's managing that. There are things on that list that are nice to have, right? It would be great to buy new furniture for many of these spaces, but we have existing furniture that can be reused in those cases. So if you remember back, I think back at the start of this project, we had about $250,000 set aside for furniture. As we worked our way along in March, when we were talking about this project and looked at these numbers, we were down to 150. If you look now, we're down to about 75, right? That's managing sort of the needs versus the nice tos.
Right. And I don't think we're at a point where it's not an issue of, it's more of an issue of planning, of just saying, gee, we're into it now. It's more than just one big number, we're finding the pieces. And I just think it's useful, not that we have to use any of these, but it's just sort of gather on another piece of paper. Here are the other 8 or 10 other things that may end up helping or not helping as we go along in the project, as we figure out whether we get back capacity in the 39 million or we start to, chisel down the capacity. That's all. It's just get a piece of paper around it. We say we know we're not there to speak about it, but we know we got our arms around it.
Another variable that we've sort of talked about is some of these ad alternates need to be decided, and we're going to talk about some tonight, or one or two of them, like now, because in the phase of the project, or you can't do them, so that's another moving thing, and so it's unfortunate, but that's just the reality of these projects and these ad alternates. So you got to make a decision now, and we've sort of alluded to based on what we're seeing here, this bigger picture and all the things that Meredith talked about in terms of potential additional resources, even still, you know, we got to ask ourselves if it's prudent to commit to brand new things when there's so much unknown. So Greg, you don't need to go over disposal fees, that's self-evident. What about the other columns to the right?
So we have soft costs. Now, soft costs are administrative costs, fees that we have to pay, sewer, water, alteration of terrain permits, food service permits, and other fees. Bonding costs are all included that. The architectural fees are in there. So we've expended $3,083,228 in that line. To date, keep in mind that a little over 2.5 million of that is in our architectural engineering already, that are already committed to. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So, jeepers, sorry about that. So what I did is I took our projected soft costs, so I know we got some more engineering costs, for instance, SW Cole coming out to do some of those work that we have, and other engineering costs that we may occur. Some additional architectural costs, some additional reimbursement. We have some additional testing services that we're gonna need.
Greg, on that one in particular, can you just quickly explain what that's all about? We
So-
spent about 40,000 in testing so far.
Yes, we have. So you get into, we have steel that has to be inspected. We have concrete, slump testing. We have core sampling that has to be done for all of those. We have materials on the site, such as the different soils that have to be tested, the gravels, the stones, and all of that have to meet certain requirements. So we have to hire a company to test and make sure all of those meet the requirements of the design. So we have those testing fees that we pay. So for instance, every time that Ekman comes out and pours concrete, we have a representative there to inspect all of the concrete. They're there the entire pour. They're taking samples. They're taking cores, and what happens with those is they're going to do a 7-day test and a fracture test and PSI test. They're going to do a 28-day test to see if it meets the requirements of the design. So those are all the fees that we have to pay in our soft costs. Another one that you can think about is we're going to have fire stopping inspections, sprinkler review inspections, fire system inspections that all have to happen and are typically third-party inspectors. So those are all included in those type of
A quick question,
fees.
or two, on the unsuitable materials, and I know we're going over that, but nothing has come up at this point that says we have a larger area of remediation. This is more of securing it and removing it or securing it where in place there's not a much larger area that we're concerned that perhaps environmental issues or anything like that is coming up.
You know, like anything, you don't know what's below the ground, but, because you can't see it, but I'm not worried about environmental issues below ground at this point. We've dealt with those as we have found them. We did a lead property abatement, so.
I think in this case, the unsuitable material doesn't mean it's contaminated or anything, it just means it's not okay for the projected use.
Yeah, no, and that's why I was just checking, because I've opened some pits before that have gotten to be much larger pits because of. The other thing was, I think we mentioned, and I know we talked a little bit before the meeting about the crosswalks and everything on the street. Are those included in this project, the fact that we may have to redo the lights, or is that outside that?
That's,
It's done,
That's-
we took the light out.
yeah, that's
That's it.
a completely different issue.
Oh, okay.
Yep, it's outside of
Don't we
this.
have to put ones in? Okay.
As we continue
Now,
on with this, we also have hazardous materials survey. So for instance, as we do abatement project in the high school, we have an industrial hygienist that is there during that entire process, doing testing and making sure all of applicable federal and state codes and requirements through DES, the EPA are all met. So we do pay for those fees to do that. So I'm projecting about 170,000 remaining in that area that we may have to spend. So that leaves that account at around 221,985 on the positive side. Again, that could go up, it could go slightly down. Some of these are a little pliable when we get to them, but they're definitely needs that we're going to have. The other one is FF&E. So we originally had $1,229,000. Of that, we've spent $683,437.30. We're projecting another expenditure of $613,406. Now, as I go through these are expenditures that we project. Some are hard numbers, some are projections that we feel, but and I'll go those one by one. Elementary landscaping, we do have some parts to the project that are not in like courtyards and things like that. Plantings out in front of the school, trees, shrubs, things like that at the elementary school. We project that cost at about $18,513, and that's based on a review by one of our vendors. We have the same requirements to do additional plantings at the high school, which is $19,850. You can see we've done some of that planting, but that's already captured in our upper costs. We have telephone and intercom costs. That number is a much tighter number than just a true projection. Those are costs that we're going to have. We have portable relocation from the elementary to the high school. That's based on what it costs us to move from front to back. We're only looking at moving one, plus hookups and things like that, so it's one unit.
And that's a good example of where we may or may not need to do that. We're still evaluating that. We've left it in as a placeholder. Things are gonna continue as we see the schedule evolve and when we know what needs, as we understand the needs and the schedule of phasing for the spring, whether or not we continue that at all.
So you're saying that it's a possibility to be an opportunity where it
It's
could be less?
possible that we can save that 98.5, but we can't say that with confidence now because we have to be able to deliver the educational program.
The next item is trash and recycle, and that's not throwing away of trash and recycling, that's putting trash and recycling bins and everything throughout the schools. Appliances, that is a hard number. We have written quotes on those numbers, and that's the new appliances that are required as we build the school. The access and camera systems, the $90,284 is actually based on remaining amount that we have to do. The cafeteria sound, we do have a quotation. We put that out to a competitive bid. That $35,000 came in at like $34,600 or something. I can get you the exact number if you do desire. But that we do have that in a hard estimate. We also have a projected estimate for lighting. Sound was not in the original FF&E for the theater at all. And
They were combined, but the total amount was 35, but we're in that range.
correct. We have a furniture allowance for $25,000 for the elementary school. We have a furniture allowance of $50,000 for the high school. We have storage and shelving, and that's going to be things like music storage that we have to still do, shelving for closets and things like that. Music risers, you notice there's no dollar amount there. That was in the original FF&E, but we've already purchased them outside in our regular operations. We have exterior signage at the junior senior high because the signage that was there is now gone. So we have carried a cost now for that. We have the storage sheds or garages that were put in for the schools. We've already put the power wiring into the one at the high school. There was no electrical cost carried in the job for wiring anything, lights, outlets, or anything inside of these buildings. And that particular building requires a feed from the building to the actual garage, whereas we already had the service at the side of the garage at the high school. That fed the lights, so we were able to jump into that. So it was a much lesser cost. It cost us about $2,025, I believe was the exact number. The tech wiring and equipment is a number that we've worked up with our tech department, and that's a pretty true number. Scoreboard for the elementary, I've already vetted that. We can buy the scoreboard for the elementary with a wireless controller for that number, and that was in the original. If you'll notice, it says kitchen equipment and got cut off, it says all schools. In that upper number of the 683,000 is the major kitchen equipment purchase. That was authorized by the school board prior. This particular number, one of the things that was removed from the scope was the point of sale workstations or pay areas for the cafeterias at both schools. That number represents the purchase of the 4, 2 in each school, register areas with these counters for that. We've carried money from moving services. We are going to have some moving services. We've spent some money in moving services. Primarily, we spent money in buying carts and equipment so we can do it ourselves and save some money. So it was a kind of a better way of doing it, but we carried another 85,000. So our projection is about 613,406, which does put the FF&E in a negative 67,843. If you'll notice with the FF&E, I have a lot more hard numbers or real costs that will be coming out of it because we've been putting those costs together for a while. So I don't have quite as much flexibility in that, although you can talk about furniture, we can talk about the portable relocation so that those areas have some ability to create some flexibility should we need to. The furnitures, we've looked at where we're at, what we can buy. We have been buying replacement furniture already, so we have some of the furniture purchased out of our operating funds for the last couple of years, which has helped bring that number down, and we've been able to reuse a lot of furniture, so those numbers are been adjusted accordingly to reflect the actual needs that we see for those areas. That's kind of where we're at. The overall projection based on that, between the contingency, the soft costs, and the FF&E, we show with projections a remaining fund about $293,159.70. Again, as it was discussed earlier with the contingency, I have 165 in undefined, I have 150 unsuitables. That number is going to change as we go through. It can go up, it can go down, but it will change, and it can be changed weekly as we continue through this project and we purchase off materials and things like that. So that's my presentation on that.
Okay, so that's the school's sort of contingency part of it, and just below that, you've summarized where we stand on Ekman's contingency.
I did. I put, yeah, and again, and I should mention, Ekman's contingency is their contingency on the project. Those funds at the end of the project would be, if there's any remaining, would be released to us. But they're not ours to control spending on through the project. It is to cover their expenditures that unforeseen for them, or issues, escalations, all of those kind of things that can happen for them as they go through this project. And to date, we've spent $232,000, or they have spent $232,339 of the $1.322 million.
Any other questions? Summary? Okay.
Thank you for putting that together.
We'll continue to refer to this and update it as we go along. I think it's helpful to have everything in one spot. Okay, so now we're going to review the alternates list and updates on items from last meeting.
I have some information on that, so if I may, should I?
Sure, yep.
So one of the things we were asked to do is to look at the courtyard costs. We had an original figure of approximately $150,000 from Ekman Construction to build as designed in the high school landscaping plan for that area. It was asked to see what the escalation cost is if we were to do that after. So they have come up with a projected cost of $174,300 $330, or approximately $24,330 more by doing it after the building's enclosed than to do it before. We were also asked to look at the cost to put the skylights. If you remember, in that particular alternate, we did not have the pricing for that in the project. It was not in the cost analysis, so the cost to put skylights in the cafetorium with, and I'll qualify this a little bit as I get through it. It was $202,118. In this particular case, if you remember a while back, I gave you a report that talked about asbestos that we have that's in our roof structures. This particular roof is one of those roofs that has asbestos, so it is going to require abatement of that areas.
Well, just a quick second. In the minutes, we had mentioned skylights at 34 and in the event corridor and 68 in the cafeteria. You just said around 200,000 for the.
This is for the cafetorium skylights, which was not priced up.
Yeah, I understand. In the minutes I'm saying of last month, we had that at 68,000 plus or something in the.
Those were different skylights that were asked to have, and I'll pull those right up. So we had a price to put skylights in the event entry, which was $34,600 in the original alternates for the high school. We also had skylights in the gym for the elementary school at $45,300. We had pyramid skylights at the elementary for $40,100. That were in their original cost projections. That were discussed.
Okay, so it's not an apples to apples. I was just
No, these are
trying to-
different locations.
Okay.
We did not have that cost analysis for the skylights in the cafetorium at the high school. So Ekman was asked to provide us a price or cost structure for that particular item, and that was where the $202,118. And I,
Those numbers, if you look at the minutes, it does say cafeteria, 68,000. The juniors in the high school, so it's either the minutes are wrong or it's.
There was a discussion about that at last meeting, but there was no hard number given, but that I do recall.
Yeah,
a
I'm
nu-
just saying it was in the minutes that
It's in the
said.
minutes.
Right,
So I just wanted-
right, a number was talked about in that range.
so that particular number, that particular cost is $202,118. That includes the structural work, the abatement of it, of the roof area. So there is quite a bit to that. Additionally, it does not include the motorized shades for that area, which I guess being that also the theater, you're really probably going to need to have those, and I don't have a cost analysis of that, but again, that particular ad alternate would have been will be $202,118 if we were to move forward.
Jeremiah, would you mind quickly just showing the design you had for the skylights, just so folks can see?
Yeah, we already previously shown you the rendering of the cafetorium.
Ingrid asked me to just like side by side, this is difficult to capture, what it would actually feel like with those skylights versus this one. The bottom one is showing you without skylights, and you can see them. You can see 6 in each bay, there are 6 of them, or 2 per bay. There's 2 here, 2 here, 2 here. They're each about 17 feet long, 6 feet wide.
Okay.
They would be, proposed this similar, skylight that was also, just the Calgon or translucent type of, that would diffuse the light in space.
So
So what's
certainly a
the
nice feature, but
What's the bottom one showing?
It's just showing the same view without skylights.
Okay.
To not have any natural light in that space. There are no windows in that area.
Mm-hmm.
So,
But the white you see on top is just giving it stand.
oh, yes. Thanks for pointing that out. there are some acoustic panels added to the wood deck in between those purlins.
Based on what we just talked about, why are we talking about specifics?
Kind of irresponsible at this point.
No, I just.
I mean, I know we gotta finish the
I
conversation.
know,
about it,
just for
but-
the sake of completeness, because what I was gonna get into now is that I think, and John, you can correct me, but I think unlike the courtyard issue, where we can do it later at an incrementally, relatively doable cost, that may not be the same case with a skylight. So it may be that, and John, maybe you can speak to those factors. I mean, is this something you can feasibly do down the road if you had available?
Anything can be done,
Yeah.
but the roof that's on that cafetorium is 6, 7 years old, something to that effect. So,
I believe that's a 2000, I'd have to look it up, but I think it's a 10, 2010.
so maybe it's 8 years old, and it may have 20 years left of life in it. In that cost is replacing the roof, because by the time you're done cutting it up to put those skylights, you've pretty much done it. So you could have the option again, when that time comes for you to do your roof. Of course, cutting your roof and doing the skylights after you've finished everything inside, you'll spend a little more money because you got to protect and you got to be careful of certain things. But it can be done. The structure, although we're going to build some framing in between to support, the structure exists now. So it's not like we're going to do something that you'd have to rip apart. We're not putting a roof on it. It exists. So other than maybe paint or whatever, we're not doing a lot that you'd be taking apart to do this.
Okay.
X-Men, I do want to, and I know you've seen this, it does say, we have not included any costs for structural considerations beyond a simple header, which John spoke with at the opening edge.
How many skylights are we talking about?
6.
6, and they're 6 by
17, I think.
6 by 17.
But
So
if I'm on-
percentage-wise, how much light does that add?
Well, that's a tough question.
I mean, where did the design of 6 skylights, 6 foot by 17 foot come from? Is a percentage of daylight adding to the area based upon the square footage, or?
Yeah, I believe so. It was we did an analysis where we actually sent the skylight, the design to.
I'm sorry,
We
can you,
sent the design to Calwell, the
Yeah.
skylight company,
okay.
to do like a photometric sort of daylight analysis to, to increase the amount of natural light in the space. And it's, as far as
So they're Calwell products, the skylights?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Hampshire-based company.
Yeah.
They helped us design the space. To reach a certain foot candle.
This may be too simplistic, but I just want to understand, if we have an existing roof that you're saying you can work within should we need to, and it's got another 8 to 10 years potential useful life and doesn't have to be significantly altered, or we can look at the skylights now, either now to say, let's have that expense of putting the extra lighting in now, or this may be able to be done not on this project, but 7 or 8 years, you can go through the same process and add the skylights in.
That's correct.
So,
This isn't something that the work wouldn't be done until next summer, correct? Would the decision technically have to be made right now?
Pretty close, yeah. Like everything else, we can't keep pushing it off and then expect, as it is, that space is going to be enough of a challenge to put together. We've built the framing of the floor. We've been doing parts of it when we've had the opportunity to make sure that we can get get this thing put together. But understand that the reason it was an alternate was not it was not believed to have been enough or important enough originally to be part of the original scope and fit within the cost structure we had. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, the fact of the matter from my perspective is that I can't ever envision me voting to support that, knowing what we know about the budget now. And the flip side of that, though, is if it doesn't go in now, it's never gonna go in. Because no matter when you go forward with a proposal like that, there's gonna be more important things to spend money on than putting skylights in a roof.
so based upon thinking like that, you had said the 202,000 included the cost to redo the roof. So how much of the 202 was the redo, would you say?
Well, you'll spend as much to try to work with the old one as to put a new one. That's why we priced it that way.
Mhm.
By the time you're done trying to chase cutting the kind of openings you're talking about, 6 large openings, you know, almost half your roof. By the time you're done that, then who's responsible for the leaks that you have? And when everybody's wondering why your brand new space now has a leak, it just, we could not price it without putting that roof on. We didn't
So I was
know.
just trying to get a sense of what the skylights cost as opposed to the roof. Of the 202,000, are the skylights half of it? Are they 50%? Is the roof 50%?
Of course.
Just looking for a sense.
Well, but again, are you asking just what it cost to purchase the skylight, or what it cost, if we didn't do the roof and we turn around and try to cut and patch the existing roof, your number is gonna be darn close to that same 202. If that's what you're asking. If you're asking me, how much is it if we just buy the skylights and have them dropped off at the site, how much does that cost? I don't know off the top of my head, I'd have to look at what we put together. But it's a chunk of it. They're not cheap. Calwell's a nice product, but it costs money. But again, to try to put those on your existing roof and cut and patch your existing roof, when we worked it through, was gonna cost almost as much as changing your roof. And we'd all be looking at each other when there was a problem up there. You got a roof that the manufacturer's not gonna be interested in warrantying after we've carved it up.
No, I totally agree with that. I'm just trying to get a sense of how much we're paying for the daylight, that's all.
I think the answer's gonna be 0.
Yeah, I would say
Maybe
too.
some light bulbs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm just curious,
I
that's all.
understand.
So Greg, Jeremiah and John, thank you for that. Any other ad alternates that are on the schedule?
Not that I believe right now.
We had talked about the electric hand dryers and the elementary,
That had already
but I
been,
think it was, because we didn't do
over.
the conduit, so.
All right, well, so might as well get right into it. Needless to say, I think we've all alluded to what our thoughts are in terms of adopting any ad alternates at this point. I can't think of a good reason to do so where we're at. As much as these are nice elements of the project, and I appreciate the design and the thoughtfulness that went into it, I just don't think it's the prudent thing to do to engage in any more substantial ad alternates right now. If anybody feels differently, let's discuss.
I agree with you, and I would take it one step further in that, I think, like I said earlier, that, you know, it's a school project, so even things like the parking lots and things, we need to look at that long and hard before we commit to spending money that we may need for one of the schools later on.
Good point.
You know, landscaping and things like that. Yeah,
there's certain landscaping we have to do, as you know,
Understood.
because of the rain gardens and
Understood.
things like that, so.
So if it's the consensus, I suggest that we table any ad alternates right now. Greg and Meredith, you continue to bring them up as they come up in terms of when we need to decide, and we'll spend an appropriate amount of time on them and move on. But is everybody comfortable with that? Okay.
Yeah.
I think the last item is a selection of finishes for the junior, senior high edition. Yeah, yeah. Check out what my color blind is. Red, green. If they have the same shade, same intensity.
Try the other one.
I have a 50% chance. Being a Yankees fan, Russ isn't sensitive to our issue. It was a 5 o'clock start.
Red Sox are ahead 2-1.
I didn't.
Nice.
Third inning.
Thanks for the update.
Okay, so,
Finishes.
we'll wait for a few people to come back. Yeah. Just continue.
Yeah, please.
So this is a continuation of the last meeting. We talked about the elementary school, and now we're moving on to the junior, senior high school. It's a little later phased in terms of the finishes, so in sequence it works well to discuss it this way. But I'm prepared at this point to talk about the additions. So this is really just the first part of the discussion. You know, I think the next building committee, you'll see a more comprehensive view of all the finishes, you know, throughout the school. So this is just looking at the additions, and it's sort of like a progress check-in of our thoughts that we've come up with in terms of the finished selections. And like before, we put together this finished board showing all the different materials that we've specified, and they are very similar to the elementary school in terms of what we called for between the two projects, which is you know, the vinyl composite tile in the hallways. You have a ceramic tile in the bathrooms, the plastic laminate for the casework. There's a resilient base down here. These are the paint colors that we've started with. We got to pick a locker color, toilet partitions, and solid surface window sills. We have some rubber there's a few things that are different in the high school that we have. Some different types of rubber that we don't have in the elementary school. We have rubber tile in the stairwells. We have a rubber athletic flooring in the weight room, and we also have a sheet rubber in the cafetorium, which isn't on this sheet yet, but I'll bring it for the next one, and we'll look at the whole school comprehensively. And I guess I'll just start just talking about you know, our ideas from these floor diagrams here. You can see the floor plans and the colors that we've suggested for the vinyl, the VCT. And our thought was that keep it fairly simple with the colors on the floor. We do have a couple different tones, but they're neutral tones. And then the color that we'd be adding would either be added through like an accent paint color or lockers. The doors we're proposing in the school are a natural wood door, like a maple, not that all that dissimilar from that type of door. And that's why we've proposed the casework to be similar, like a maple color for the plastic laminate to bring some warmth into the project. But as far as the floor patterns go, we in general, we sort of have this, as I was saying, this two-toned approach where we have, which kind of acts as like a threshold as you enter the room, and it would also, as you enter the room, we have these little alcoves typically, you know, that allow the doors to swing out into the hallway without them projecting into the hallway width. They're recessed. You can kind of see some of those, you know, in these images here. They bump into the classrooms. So we were thinking that could be an opportunity to have some accent color within those alcoves, and then that kind of translates into the classroom, like just on the teaching wall, for instance. So we have a gray here, and here's the lighter gray that would be sort of like that transition or accent into each one of these particular spaces. And we've chosen, you know, corresponding colors that we think that will work well with those. For the resilient base, for instance, we have this grayish tone to work with the gray VCT. This black base we're proposing in the weight room only to go with this rubber that we're suggesting for the weight room floor, which is just a black with some red specks in it. So that's general thought so far on the floor plans. You can see here is the middle school side, and then you have of the west addition, and then here's the east addition up here. So there's pretty much you know, VCT throughout, and I was saying a gray rubber in the stairwells,
And for the ceramic tile, we were thinking that we would carry sort of the color as like a sign. You know, part of this is to try to create a wayfinding scenario too, so it would familiarize you with where you are in the school. So we were thinking that we would have a different accent color per se, in the high school area than you have in the middle school area. So we were thinking like this sort of reddish color in the middle school area and the blue in the high school area. And then we have this green that we're proposing as an accent in the event entry area. So that's what these 3D renderings are showing. If you can get a closer look, this is a 3D view of that, you know, the corridor at the event entry, where we have this like big placemat, which is the darker of the VCTs, with some highlights into the music rooms of this green. So this is sort of one of the more public spaces in the project, other than the main entry that will be used quite frequently. So we have some display cases in there that would be a maple color. You can see a bench here. These are the stairways that lead up to the middle school wing. So the lockers, there's some investigation, to be honest, I need to do before the next meeting, and that's looking a little bit closer of what you have inside the existing high school in terms of, and ask you guys, you know, do you want to match the color of your existing lockers? Because there's some that are going to remain, and we have quite a few that are new, so we'll have to get a game plan together on that. There's a lot of light blues, I guess you'd say, in most of the school, except for the reds and the blacks in the gym area. So that's sort of another discussion, like, are we kind of like just starting from scratch in terms of our approach here on the colors and the paints? Because it's all going to get painted, you know, and it's an opportunity to do something completely different, you know, if you want a facelift, a new look. So that's kind of the direction that we were headed, but it needs to evolve a little bit, and then that'll be part of the next meeting discussion. But I'd welcome any comments or suggestions.
So at this point,
They
you're
might have.
talking about colors, the materials and everything have already been spec'd.
That's right.
So-
Yeah, we're not proposing anything different.
Right. So I'm 100% support whatever
Yeah.
colors you suggest. That's
Yep.
way beyond my pay grade.
I second
And
that.
there will be a.
Since I can't
yeah.
distinguish between most of them.
The
But
one
Yeah.
question I would ask is what you just brought up was about repainting lockers and whatnot. And I'd ask Mr. Mazzoni, is there a reason? Do we need to have different colored lockers, black and red in the gym and stuff in that area versus throughout the whole
No,
school?
what Jeremiah alluded to was that we have two sort of very different sets, styles, and colors of lockers.
Right.
I think the best thing to do would be to continue on the course that we're on with the gray, which we can talk about
Yeah.
during your investigative piece.
Yeah, right.
But I think we've sort of prepared for this for the last 4 or 5 years, so we've been replacing some of the older blue ones with some of the newer ones that will translate well to this. So we've kind of thought ahead on that.
Okay.
But I too am not a color scheme individual
Yeah,
necessarily.
and there, before the next meeting, when we do the full discussion of all the finishes, I'll have to touch base or keep in close contact with Ekman in terms of the schedule, if they might need something in the additions selected beforehand. That's the reason why we've kind of scheduled this meeting to get this discussion going, is to pick the finishes that we're going to need, and because the tile, for instance, has an 11 to 12 week lead time, we were told.
Well, unless somebody has another.
Well, for the most part, I agree that I'm happy with the colors, and I certainly don't want to quabble over colors. But
Yep.
the one thing I just want to make sure on is that you're looking at the hallways flooring being a consistent color. When I start to get twitchy when things in hallways have any kind of pattern in them, because the children will go from the same colored block to the next colored block and jam up hallways just in the way that they move about because of any pattern on the floor.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
That's true at the high school level than at the elementary level, but it can.
True.
Yeah.
Middle school kids thinking.
You mean a little hopscotch?
Yes, yeah. So they have a name for it, and I can't even think of what it is. But they try to only stay on the red. Say if there's What?
Like Eric, I would defer to the people who have to live with the students and the building on a day-to-day basis to choose the colors and the patterns. I have
Yeah,
nothing to add to that.
wanna make
So
sure-
I'm hoping you guys are
Yeah.
involved in the colors and know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So Jeremiah, I guess the consensus is as far as we've got so far, I guess it's a go, is that right? I
Sure.
think so. And
Yeah.
you've got some more, you'll show us at next
Yeah,
meeting.
and we may even, after we evaluate, what's going on in the existing building and talk to Chris and everything, start to rethink a couple of these paint colors, for example, and kind of make it all work together a little better. But paints is something that can wait, But, yeah, appreciate the support in that.
Thank you.
Yep.
So that's our last item. Are there any other questions folks have? If not, when's our next meeting in November? About a month out.
It's the 20th,
Say November 20th.
which is the night before the Thanksgiving break.
Yep. All right, 5 o'clock. If there's nothing else, let's
20th.
adjourn. Thank you.